And ladies and gentlemen, it's Wednesday. Time for another episode of Cameron and Flask, joined by the following host, Jem Schofield, Ben Barden, two lovely gentlemen. How are you guys doing?
We're fine. I mean,
all right.
Ish. Yeah. An odd
Ish,
I'd say ish.
Yeah.
Lots of production. Ben's got some ouchy back, neck, shoulders. I think a rib's starting to go out for me. It's good times all around. A couple gentlemen already in the chats, maybe ladies as well. David, 360 grad. Baron, hey, good to see you, man. Sam and Clay, welcome. So, this week we're talking about cameras. Things are getting just crazy here. It's kind of nuts. So before we do that, what are you guys up to these days? How are things going? How's your week going?
Yeah.
How are your spirits?
Spirits are pretty good. I we'll see how long it lasts, but I'm busy, which is really nice for the time being. And I'm just trying to manage mentally and physically and logistically everything that's going to happen when school starts in a few days. I think Ben has already gone down that road, but his children are actually going to a physical school, whereas that's not happening here. So I'm in the barn a lot more, and I'm just trying to struggle with that, as well as try to get a relatively big project off the ground. So thanks for asking. But, you know, that was me knocking on wood.
Nice. All right. We also have Michael in the chat. Good to see you, man. So let's go straight to business. Chat, what are you sipping on this evening? And then you two gentlemen, what's going on? So we'll start with Ben. What you got?
Well, I'm all dosed up on ibuprofen, but I'm gonna mix that up with a little whiskey. I think just see how those two blend together.
Okay.
So it's the cooking whiskey, the everyday driver. It's the Queen Margot Little Special, super cheap but super good, smooth one, as per nearly every episode.
Yes.
Delightful.
That's me.
Perfect. Jem, we're doing scotch. We're doing something else today.
I'm doing the scotch. I'm not going to have much today. We're starting to settle into what might be the new Shooter weekly show and how that runs, which is very different than this because we don't have this rotating hosts, and you're serving. It's just a different animal. So I'm going to go a little easier. I'm going to bring in a good one though while I have a sip. So we've got the 12 year. Is it the 12 year? Glendronach, and I'm just going to have a very wee dram of that today. And what about you, Caleb?
Nice.
What are you having?
This week, I already poured myself a glass. Oh, sorry, guys. Anything upper body, even if it's a bottle. We're doing Maker's Mark. This is becoming my daily. Caleb
Very
levels, as usual, has to be done. Oh, okay.
Speaking of, first of all, Roz Humphreys' first live video. I can only listen in because doing paid work while on here, which is great. So welcome to the stream. And I see some funny things. By the way, my volume and my mic is a bit low. Okay, well, I can maybe handle a little bit of that. Let me hear you gentlemen as well. Let me see what's happening.
Check. Check 1, 2.
Interesting.
Hello.
Carlos Timothy. Check 1, 2.
All right, I'll work on that while you get things going because I am also in a new system here. So yeah.
Just answering Carlos's comment. Can we talk about Caleb's subtle flex rocking the Atlas Orion anamorphics on his Panasonic S5 video? So that clip of the Atlas anamorphics was actually from my S1H video when I was in Los Angeles playing with that camera for the first time. So unfortunately, I don't own or regularly rent those, but they are pretty sweet. And even just recently, about every 6 months, I try to convince myself out of buying 1 or 2 or 3 of those. That's another discussion. It's a regular conversation with my wife as well.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah. Oh, so good though, man. Right. So we're dealing with Jem's audio.
Yeah.
We're
No, it's okay.
see, David's
I'm gonna
drinking
boost a
Good
little.
People.
How's that? Is that?
Good
I
People
feel like I'm
Brown.
clipping now.
Ooh.
Is that bad?
I think you sound okay, but I don't know what the
Yeah.
final stream is.
Let's
David's doing Good People Brown Ale. Baron's
Yep.
doing Suntory
see. Ooh, Japanese whiskey.
Very nice.
Taki.
Talkie.
Delicious stuff.
I had a rye whiskey, Angel's Envy, the other day that was aged in like Caribbean cask. That was really good for our anniversary dinner. Exceptionally good.
Very nice.
Very nice. Yes.
So
yeah, just tell me on the volume if it's okay and if I'm clipping or anything, because then I'll have to go to camera. But thank you.
Sure.
So
Sam
white noise
Corner,
audio,
my
what does
usual
that mean?
dunkel going down here.
Yeah, that's the white noise is the MacBook Pro. The engine's firing up, so I apologize.
Mine
I'm
is
done
as
with
well.
Tech talk. I know. Dang. Sorry.
Nice. All right, so let's dive in, boys and girls. This week alone, we've had 2 camera announcements. One rumory very early stage, and then one that was fully announced today, the Panasonic S5. So we're going to tackle those, maybe some other stuff that's upcoming. Do you guys have any thoughts on all this? Was tickled pink to see the FX6 kind of tease?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it wasn't the name was nailed. I mean, we've been talking FX6 for quite some time, and then here we are. We have an official announcement, and it is in fact the name. The big question is it a scaled down innards of an FX9 or is it a beefed up innards of an A7S3? But excited to see it. Want to see what the price point comes in at. I would say, yeah, Clay, you did call the name on a previous show. It's the price that's going to be the tricky part, because you could say that camera, because it's full frame, could easily hit the market at $7,500 US. The rumor is at about $7,000 US. It would be really sweet if all of these new cameras that are coming out in that price, bracket are falling in the $600 to $6,500 price range. That's where I'd like to see them, because it makes sense in terms of the jump from the higher end mirrorless cameras, but is enough of a difference that you're not saying, oh, do I want to get an FX9 or, oh, do I want to get a C300 Mark III? And of course, form factor is going to be an advantage for some people, though they're all starting to be about the same size in that market anyway. So I'm excited that it's happening. And, there's obviously rumors, and I'm not under any NDAs or anything with Canon, but it looks like there's going to be something coming not that long from now. We'll see from Canon. And I still feel like with Panasonic's S5 announcement, we're still missing something from them in that EVA price point. So, yeah, those are my initial thoughts. Yeah.
Which Clay just mentioned in the chat. Yeah, that'd be what's interesting about this camera, the FX6, and I guess we'll start there. Is that with the FX, correct me if I'm wrong, but when the C500 Mark II was announced, right around the exact same time, the Sony FX9 was announced, right?
Yes.
Am I wrong?
Yes.
I feel like it was within like a couple weeks.
No, it was within a couple of weeks, and they're very different cameras, but they were basically at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. So now the Canon C300 Mark III has been out for a while, or at least announced for a while. And Sony has had some time to like react almost with their FX6. So I wonder if that plays into their pricing, because if they could undercut that, and like you said, I think 6 would be amazing, $6,000, because now anyone who's like ready to jump on the Komodo is like, well, that could be interesting. Variable ND, especially if it's full frame, which it looks like it is.
Yep.
That could be pretty interesting. Autofocus, exactly. That could be really, really interesting. I mean, obviously, they're different animals, right? But still, that could be very unique.
Yeah.
Cool. What do you guys think of the chat with this camera? Anything from you, Ben, as a previous Super 35 Sony user?
I know, just
Painful for
kind of
drivers.
interesting. Yeah. Interesting. There were some odd things on it, like no EVF on it from the images on there. So that's kind of interesting, depending on what they put on it with the touch screen, how good that is. But yeah, it's a very interesting space that seems to be rapidly developing, and just very keen to see what Canon come out with. I was having this conversation with regular chat bod Jago, who I work with a lot, and we were
Nice.
talking about this and going, you know, the rumored specs on that Canon one. We're both sort of fairly heavily balls deep in Canon, as you would say, with their lenses and everything else, and that's really interesting in terms of just getting weight down. And the way I've been working on this project at the moment, this form factor is really good, and that more compact size, hugely important to me as time goes on. And the reason my back's killing me today is because of all the lugging a lot of heavy gear around, and a 2-camera shoot where I've been having to work on my own when there should have been 3 of us due to various stuff that's going on. But you know, those smaller form factors really interesting, and at that price point as well, because you're looking into being able to get pairs of things, which is really interesting. So
You know,
we will see.
this is a little bit of a pivot, but I'm feeding a little bit off of what you were talking about, having to do with your production and you know, size of crew, and that you had to do everything yourself and stuff. What's really interesting, which is a totally different discussion, but I just want to bring it up as an aside, is that I'm putting together a project which is almost exclusively post-production for an existing client that I have. And it's going to be 5 remote editors, if it happens, knock on wood. And it will be an ongoing project. But the interesting thing is that they're doing their production down in LA, and they said, well, you know, we'll have backup crew, but the main person who's going to be on camera, there's no backup. So what do you do with COVID? And they're going to have to do rapid testing every single time they do production. So everybody will walk in on Monday morning, and within 15 minutes they'll get they'll get a result. And it's kind of crazy because they're on the hook for all of the production people and all of the post-production people who will be working 5 editors 5 days a week for all of those costs if the teacher's not available because they test positive. It's just crazy what's happening right now in production. And if you're a production company, you're just taking on an enormous amount of responsibility, or a company that's doing production. I'm sorry I took it aside. It's just really like it's something happening right now. So sorry about that, Caleb, but it's yeah.
But I mean, just to follow up on that a little bit, the reason I was on my own last weekend is because one of the camera assistant, who's been shooting a lot and she's been great, who's a student, and she's been really, I mean, the whole project's wonderful. I'm having a really good time with it, and they're a great bunch of people. But a contact of hers tested positive. She then has to go into isolation for this period of time. She's back in action for this week's episode that we're shooting at the weekend, which is great. But it just has these huge knock-on effects. And this is the second time, and we're what, 4 episodes in? This is the second episode that we've had a major disruption due to people being put into quarantine or being put into isolation due to COVID stuff, and the numbers are going up here. So it's gonna happen again and again and again. And how the hell do you budget for it? How do you plan around it? You presumably you can't get insurance for this.
Yeah.
No one's going to be covering this kind of stuff right now. It's a really big big issue, and it's to the point where it just feels inevitable that it's just going to keep happening for the foreseeable future. So yeah, strange times.
Stick to your studio, Caleb. Don't let anybody in. Lock the door.
Don't speak to anyone.
just keep the content coming. Don't go back to your old life, for sure. It's a mess out there. Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy. On that
Sorry.
note.
Sorry.
That's
And
all right.
so going back to the FX6, I mean, I think that camera is going to be a really interesting camera. You know, if the AF system is the A7S III, I think that's going to be exciting. I would, you know, they've got a weird thing they've got to do now, because they kind of tried to make the FS7, FS5, and the, you know, A7 series work together. But the reality is there was such a big gap between the FS5, FS5 II, and the FS7 and FS7 II in terms of the image quality you could get from them. And I think that gap has closed tremendously because of what they're doing with the A7S III. And if they can get their color science to be consistent, this is always the challenge for every camera manufacturer right now, is they're all putting different freaking sensors into all of their cameras. And they say that they have a log curve, and they say that they have a particular gamut that they're using. But because the sensors are all different and they have to come to market so quickly, they're not doing what Arri does. I always bring up Arri because that's what they do. They say, we're going to have 5 cameras, but they're either all going to have the same sensor, or if they don't have the same sensor going forward, you bet that they're spending time in the laboratory making sure that if you took out the new camera, there would be a mode you could go into to match it with the older sensor or whatever they have to do. I mean, that's a key to the castle, is making a consistent, you know, product that is something you can, you know, you have reliability of what the image is. So I think it's going to be a challenge. Yeah.
I was just I'm trying to look up the megapixel count on the FX9. Do you guys know that?
No, but I'm sure B&H made up a number that they put on their
Well, not the
pre-order,
6,
no
but
pre-order
the 9.
number. Oh, the 9, sorry.
Dang it, I can't find that. If anyone knows, let me know, because that would
So
kind of
then
be
we can try
interesting.
to, like some sleuthing in
'Cause
terms
if
of whether or not.
I mean, yeah, my guess is 20 to 24, somewhere in there. A7S III is 12.
Yeah.
So if it's the same sensor from the FX9, I would imagine they could very easily align those two cameras together. And with the new A7S III, you know, color science, all the stuff they've done, the higher data rates, I would imagine this is going to be the best case for Sony ever since inception, really, to have all their cameras line up. And what would be crazy is if, depending on what that sensor is, if that sensor trickled down to, I don't know what size that is, but if it was like in the 20 to 24, that's A7 III land. If they then could use the same sensor
in the
that
next A7 IV, right? Whatever replaces the A7 III.
Because that's traditionally a 20 megapixel, I believe.
Interesting.
Which is just about the sweet spot, because you can get 6K, blah, 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 blah. Interesting. Ben, question for you with this FX6. Let's say, you know, magically flower, blurry dream vision, where in the future COVID is a thing of the past, or at least, you know, the pandemic wave 1 is a thing of the past. You're getting jobs left and right like crazy. What would you consider going back to Sony? So instead of using C200 EOS R, what would it take for you to go to FX6 A7S III? Because you seem to like this like combo, which I totally understand. It makes sense. You know, cinema camera and a mirrorless, and kind of a follow-up / extension to that question. What would Canon have to do with these 2 rumored mini cinema cameras to keep you from switching to Team S Sony?
Excellent question. I think, kind of going back to what Jen was saying and having this kind of consistent color between things, what is going to make life easiest in post? That's a huge thing. You know, how much time do you spend matching stuff up? And the R and the C200 do play nicely together generally. You know, they're reasonably easy to match, but it's not. There isn't a LUT you can just drop on one and yes, they match up. There's still work, and it depends on the light that you're in. It depends if you're outdoors. You know, so that's a huge thing. So Sony, I think really interesting at the moment, and obviously that with the 7 S3, that's a great form factor's good. I like all that. And Canon, in terms of these new ones, I just make something small, ND in it. I don't really need RAW. I've had my C200 for nearly 2 years. I've shot one project on RAW, and I didn't need to. It was really only because I wasn't going to shoot that much material, and I was figured like, let's just mess with it. And the image is beautiful, and it is definitely better. Of course, it's wonderful, but I don't. The money making side of what I do with that camera, I don't need that. So just 10-bit, some all right frame rates. Great to have some 120 in there. ND, obviously, some audio inputs would be great. Some proper audio inputs in those things. But a pair, really, if some of those things that were looking almost like a slightly beefed up R5 on the various little mock-ups that have been doing the rounds on the rumor sites, that with some cooling in it, obviously, but kind of something between a small cinema camera and a mirrorless body, and a pair of those, then you haven't got this problem with the color matching. You've got two identical cameras, but things that you can stick on a small gimbal. I don't want to be. That's a big consideration. Where can we get that onto lightweight gimbals? Where can I place that onto light tripods? So 2 of the exact same camera solves everything, really. So with either, the Sony's a little too big, but that's why this Canon one's kind of interesting to see what that is like in terms of form factor. But if that's kind of somewhere between R5, C200, obviously with no Canon bullshit in it, no hamstringing stuff, no overheating issues and any of that crap, then that's where we go. But Sony, great. If we're starting again right now, I think that would be a huge temptation, and particularly because the color's so much better these days. That was a very long-winded way of not really answering your question.
FS107. Oh, that's makes sense totally.
Yeah.
Right. So, any other comments, thoughts on this FX6 business? And yes, man, I don't know what time this would be, but if we could see to get a nice spectrum, like $2,000 to $7,000 or whatever, if the A7 IV comes out, these Canon cameras, an EVA2, I mean, if we can get to that point in the next 6 months, like everything's on the table. Granted, more stuff will be coming in the future.
Yeah.
But we've had such an onslaught of stuff. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like right now is the most intense camera time ever.
But don't you find that kind of weird? Because
in this space, it's messed up.
But
it's crazy. Why would you do that right now?
Well, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like the one time when I would say most of us have got the least amount of disposable income that we've ever had. We're all penny pinching. We're all kind of terrified. We get. I know Jem's busy at the moment. I've got some decent jobs in now, but we're kind of holding on to. Well, I'm certainly reluctant to spend big bucks on anything at the moment because everything's just can get locked down, as we were talking about. COVID could lock a project down pretty quickly. Now, it's just bizarre to me that all these camera companies are coming out with all this amazing stuff. Maybe it's all been in the pipeline for a long time, and it's just I guess they're not going to sit in it. They're going to launch it, but it's just an odd situation.
Do you think they're all throwing it at the fan to save themselves? Not save themselves, but
No, I mean, yes and no. I mean, personally, I think that every single one of these companies has a product cycle, and they've all been working on these cameras, and they have to continue their product cycle. So now they're on to their next cameras. So they either sit there and say, okay, we're bumping everything by a year and a half, and they're employing people. It's not like the people in the labs can't work generally and everything else. Yes, I mean, to a certain degree, they're throwing it out there, but because one company's throwing it out there, everybody's throwing it out there. Because nobody wants the A7S3 to come out and be the only mirrorless camera. So then Panasonic's going to come in, and then You know, Fuji's going to come in whatever their XH2 is going to be. I mean, can you imagine if they dropped a digital cinema camera like the FX6 or
geez.
the, you know, or the EVA 2, but they put a medium format sensor in there that could crop to full frame and Super 35, which they could do. That would be crazy. You know, I mean, I think you're right. I think it is the most bonkers ever because there have been times where it just seems like everybody's coming out with new cameras, but they're all cameras that are in the $7,500 to, you know, $12,500 or $15,000 price range. Now we've got cameras from almost every manufacturer that at least starts at $2,000 US and goes all the way up to about $12,000. And they're really vying for people's attention to say, we're going into a whole system. Here's your gimbal camera or your little camera, and then here's your, okay, you can't go up to the $10,000 camera. Well, we've got a camera for you for $6,500 to $7,500. Plus, let's, you know, for giggles, we'll just throw raw output on it, which of course Sony's been doing forever on their cameras. And man, it's bonkers right now. And it's so good. I mean, it is going to be hard for people to decide. And it is for sure going to be, like, I'm using the, you know, as much as it's getting crap, and it's getting a lot of crap, I'm using the R6 and the R5, and I'm shooting with those cameras. And I have to tell you that especially on the R5, shooting in standard mode, which doesn't have the overheating issues, that is a sharp sensor. It's not as sharp as when you're shooting in 4K fine, but it is a sharp sensor. I've taken that footage now and brought it into timelines and looked at it. So there are issues. There's things that camera needs to evolve with, and I hope that they address most of them, if they can, to whatever degree they can, with the realities of it being, you know, essentially a sealed camera body with the size that it is. And we're also hearing, which I know we're going to be getting to, that, you know, the S5 is a really small camera, and it has the potential to have overheating issues as well. They might be different than the R5 and stuff and the R6, but they're still there when you get into that form factor. So I'm very excited about this middle tier of the market. You know, this whole FX6,
Absolutely.
whatever Canon comes out with, I think that's great. And then look at what Panasonic's sort of setting themselves up for. They're really setting themselves up for, if the EVA 2 is a full frame camera, then they're really sort of cementing themselves into a space now with Sony and with Canon, which is going to be really interesting, especially if Canon comes out with a sub $7,500 US full frame camera. That's the question. Will they do that? They have it in mirrorless, but will they do it in a digital cinema camera, or will they say it just starts with the C500 Mark II? I think that would be a mistake for them.
All right, let me pause you right there, Jim. We got a lot of people in the chat saying buffering issues, lag. Stream is breaking down every 5 seconds. There's a delay. I'm watching it on my second display here. Let us know in the chat if it's stabilized. It looks on my end like it's stabilized, and the spinny is stopped. Now it's working clear again. Okay. So sorry about that.
I'm just going to take this little pause in proceedings just to welcome Jan Novak, Honza, my friend, who is from this neck of the woods, he's an amazing photographer and works for a company called Fome, who make excellent lighting products here in the Czech Republic. So, ciao, Honza. Welcome.
Okay, and he says something very interesting, so thank you for this info. C70 is already privately being presented at rental house owners. 4K 120, 422, Full HD 240, UHS-2 slots, multiple formats, simultaneous recording, Genlock, ND filters. Interesting. Is it 10-bit?
Yes, that's everything I've read is 10-bit.
Stick in the bottom, right? Oh, 10-bit. Okay, good.
Right.
Well,
or for one of them, maybe?
Well, so here's the other question. Is this the first camera that Canon's going to come out with that costs less than $7,500 that has a timecode port? That may not be important to a lot of people, but when you're doing multi-camera, if you can just take a BNC cable and you can plug it in between two cameras and you can jam sync timecode with a BNC cable, that's a big advantage, you know, for a lot of productions. I really hope that we see a camera that's in this XC form factor. We've been talking about it for years. If they did an RF mount XC camera that was in that, in that form factor with an RF mount, that would be great. I'd be excited about that. But I guess we'll see. Don't know about this buffering.
If
or
Fuji
the
came out with the cinema camera,
yeah.
Fuji comes out a cinema camera, and Canon does, this thing that we've been talking about forever, the XC line, but bigger sensors and, ND on some kind of S1H style camera, then we're happy. All the stuff we've been yapping about for ever.
So, it becomes. When Canon, all the rumor sites started talking about that particular line, those next things that we're waiting for at the moment in this space, I'm not interested. And the more and more I think about it, the more it just makes perfect sense to me. It just
the
so
XC10 updates.
Peaked. No, not the XC10, but that as well. But just this smaller form factor stuff and what they're
right.
If they come out with that
Agreed.
XC line, they could do something really interesting. I don't know if they'll do it, but if they came out with that XC form factor and they kept that as a super 35 millimeter sensor, let's say they put the C300 Mark III sensor inside of that camera body, and then they come to market with that at, let's say, ideally $5,000, but let's say it's $5,500 US. There's no stills capability, so they're differentiating right there. But they're in that $5,000-ish price range. Then they open up the opportunity for themselves to do a baby C500 Mark II at some point. They're obviously going to have to cripple it to an extent because they don't want to lose that C300 Mark III market in the 10,000-ish price point. But Canon is probably going to have to come in with a full-frame digital cinema camera that's somewhere below the C500 Mark II at some point, especially if that FX9 comes to market and it's full-frame, which it probably will be. FX6, I'm sorry. And then also, what's stopping Panasonic again from coming out with a full-frame EVA? They're not held to that staying Super 35, especially if there's a crop mode that does Super 35. They could easily say
100%.
It's the EVA 2 and it's a full
Well, they have the
camera.
sensor waiting, haven't they? The sensor's all there. It's all just ready to go.
Well, that's it.
Oh, 100%. All they have to do is take the EVA 1, make it not plastic and hollow and terrible, make some ergonomic changes. I love them, but the jump, you hold
Best
an
screen ever.
S1H and it's like, wow, this thing is dense. It feels amazing in the hands. Almost Canon level ergonomics, just great. You work with the VariCam. Wow, this thing is super nice. And then the EVA 1 is Fisher Price. I don't know. It's just not quite right.
Yeah.
But they just take the S1H. That's all they have to do. Take the S1H, put it in a larger body. Throw ND at it.
Yeah.
Unlike their last camera, the Mark 1. The Mark 1 doesn't have ND, I don't think.
Which one?
The EVA 1.
EVA
doesn't
1
have
has
ND, does it?
It has ND.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
It has ND. It just has a screen that's so bad that you can't see if the ND's on or off. Because you can't actually. It's like looking through a Coke bottle from 1975. It's the worst.
Worse than the C100.
Worse. Oh,
yeah,
are you kidding?
Honestly.
By far.
Terrible.
C100 Mark I screen, forget about the non-articulating component. The screen quality is so much better than the EVA 1. EVA 1 is the most garbage screen that's ever been put on a digital cinema camera in the history of digital cinema cameras.
Everything about the EVA 1 is shit, but it makes such a beautiful picture. It's such a nice image of it.
Yeah. It's got that nice Panasonic color, yeah.
They lent me
and
one, and I shot a job on it, and it's great. The image of it is beautiful, but it's such a pain in the ass to use.
Yeah.
And on that lovely note, let's transition over to the S5
Let's say
from
something nice about
Panasonic, also
Panasonic.
from Panasonic. Yeah, actually,
Yeah.
it's right over there. I could grab it, I suppose. Panasonic S5 announced today, $2,000, essentially a baby S1H, or one could argue a full frame GH5. I think it's more like a baby S1H because it's missing, like the GH5 has all the yummy higher data rate stuff. Yeah, for $2,000, if autofocus is not a concern, you're done. Sign the check,
So
walk away.
Rewind. If autofocus is not a concern, and of course you dropped a video today, so you've had the camera in hand, the pre-production model.
Right.
Is the autofocus for the people watching reliable enough for corporate production, or would you say
No,
look elsewhere?
To me, it's family videos, maybe some vlogging. That's about it. If you're a potato jet type, a Peter McKinnon type, where you're, running around pointing the camera at yourself at roughly the same distance, like vloggers, they don't go from vlogging at 4 feet from themselves to 20 feet. It's the same kind of rough. If the camera locks on, you're good to go in that range. Okay, but if you start trying to focus on someone running toward the camera, moving from 4 feet away to 30 feet away, that's where it's gonna really struggle. And even then, it's got that classic DFD, like the wubba wubba in the the background. The bokeh's just going nuts.
Yeah.
But it is so far the best Panasonic autofocus. I was pretty surprised that it was, like I mentioned in my video, I would consider this the first usable. Like in previous cameras, I never even tried.
Yeah.
I tested it when I first get the camera, and then I'm like, yep, never switching it to AFC. It's just going to live in manual focus land.
Yeah.
But this is the first one where it's like, well, for more casual stuff. I filmed a little bit, some tests. I was just watching Potato Jet's video, and he really leaned into the autofocus and I think he just left it on AFC the whole time.
Yeah.
And you can definitely see where it falls apart, but I mean, this is the first time I've seen it not, previous cameras, it would just epically fail. We're talking like running mascara, just a disaster.
Yeah.
It would just go out of focus and stay there for like 10, 15 seconds and then maybe catch focus or just stay there forever. So it is improved. I said in my video too, I feel like they've got it. The team that does the algorithm, they're done. They figured it out. The tracking, when you look at the tracking, I did a video where or a test where I had me walking around filming myself, and then off to one side, I did an external recording of the actual tracking, the box and the eye focus and all that stuff. All of that felt great. Pretty close to what really close to what Canon and Sony have, but the actual DFD is all that's holding it back. So from an algorithm perspective, their tracking and their recognition is totally there.
Interesting.
So I feel if they could switch to a different system, they could rank pretty quickly with everybody else. So that's good. It's just a matter of time. I feel like it's eventually going to have to happen. It's just a matter of time.
The problem is that we go into the next round of cameras, and if the EVA 2 doesn't nail it, then for so many people, that FX6 and then whatever potentially Canon comes out with will take the win, because when you're setting up for an interview, you don't want to shoot your interview at a 5.6, you want to shoot it at a 2.8. You're by yourself, and you want that AF system to be rock solid. I mean, even on a C200, it's who's sitting in
reliable.
front of who's sitting in front of the camera for that interview, and it's going to be 100% reliable for a certain person, and then it's not for others, and then depending on your lighting. But what we're seeing is a huge leap forward in the last 6 months in terms of what AF can do in low light with gray matter. You can break it for sure. You shoot in log, there's too much gray matter, not enough contrast. Even the dual pixel systems, you know, can break down, but it's so much more reliable right now than it was
Yeah.
even in the previous generation. Yeah.
Absolutely, and even with the C200 to the EOS R, the difference is enormous. The R very rarely lets me down. The C200 just gives up halfway through a shoot. It'll just go, no, I'm not doing the face thing anymore. And I can't get it to, the box won't come up. You know, the face, but nothing. It's gone. It's gone. And the guy's midway through, and you just go, I hope to hell this is wherever it stopped focusing.
Yeah.
Hopefully is still tight, and it has never left me high and dry with that. But it's just like that panicky thing.
Sure.
It's terrible. So it's a huge thing, and for people who work like I do, it's having that absolute confidence in an AF system, which I don't have in any of them as yet. But I know what trips them up generally.
I've used the EOS R,
systems.
and now using the EOS R6 and especially the R5, that AF system tracking, forget face tracking, just putting your finger on an object and then starting to pan the camera and move it around and how well it locks on. Of course, you can break it. But if you're talking about standardly well-exposed images, I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't shoot an interview with either of those cameras, and if they put that AF system into their next generation of digital cinema cameras, it's going to be pretty bonkers in terms of what you can do. And the same with the FX6. You take that A7S3 AF system and you put that into that camera. I mean, a lot of people who used to say they would never use AF are now starting to not only use it, but they're starting to rely upon it in certain situations. So it's
100%.
really interesting.
And that's my next point is there was a time when, people would be like, oh man, I wish the autofocus was better for video. And everybody, myself included, I'll admit it, was like, get out of here. And at the time, using autofocus in a professional setting was absurd. But now, what's hilarious is that's never been the, hill I'll die on myself. Sure, it's amazing when it works well, and I appreciate cameras that do it well. But I've been shooting Panasonic almost exclusively for the actual work that I do for the channel. Since the GH5 came out, and I'm okay with manual focus or their version of kind of a hybrid where you tap on the screen and it focuses once. That's been working for me forever. Sure, I'd prefer something else, but it's definitely becoming a thing where people, I run into people who have been doing it as long as I have, or even longer, and they now have to have good autofocus. So Panasonic has always compensated with other features. So if you look at each of their cameras at the time it was released, it always had other stuff to try to make up for it, right? Yep. So the EVA1, what was it? It had higher resolutions and frame rates. And then their smaller cameras like the GH5 or the GH line always had a smaller sensor, but ridiculous specs for the time when it comes to resolution, frame rates, and assist features has been their big thing. And they threw in the kitchen sink with this with this S5. It has most of what the S1H has, with exception to data rates and the ridiculous, 6K internal and open gate, anamorphic, which, by the way, people who complain about not having full frame anamorphic, to cover that, you need a 200 millimeter anamorphic lens. So, Super 35 still, or Academy 35 is still, primary.
Explain that for people so they understand that a little bit more.
Yeah, so anamorphic, it's going to grab information from the side at a 2x in most cases. So you need, most of the time we're filming video at 16:9. This is 4:3. So you need the physics of an anamorphic lens. A 50 millimeter anamorphic is always going to be super large compared to an average 50 millimeter.
Yep.
So they don't really make anamorphic lenses that cover, you know, full frame, because it's
Yep.
open gate full frame or whatever, because it would need to be, you know, the size of a desk
Yeah.
to be able to do that. So, you know, but, you know, spec nerds will come out and be like, well, it doesn't have open gate full frame, you know,
Yeah, of course.
anamorphic. But the lens you would need to cover that is absurd. So you need a longer lens that can, it's just easier to do that. To be able to shoot at 50 millimeter open gate, full frame, anamorphic
Yep.
would be ridiculous. So
Interesting.
Panasonic has always had more features,
Yeah.
but I mean, it has to happen in the next 2 years, I think. What do you guys think?
Well, let me ask you a question, because you are a GH5 user, and they do put the kitchen sink in there. And one of the things I noticed with the S5, besides the fact that there are limitations on record times for many of the frame rates and resolutions that you're using in the camera, that sort of 30-minute heat management frame rate. And in fact, Matt Allard over at News Shooter did a test, put it outside, you know, at 18 minutes plus, he got you know, overheating issues with the camera, brought it inside, was able to continue recording for a little while. It settled down. But if you're looking today, Caleb, take the autofocus out. Forget the autofocus for a second. And you're looking at the fact that the GH5 has better data rates in terms of recording, right? Higher bit rates than the S5. Because to me, on paper, there's only one mode, which I think is anamorphic, which is 200 megabits per second. You're basically in 100 to 150 megabits per second for all of the other resolutions when we're talking about 4K resolutions. So that's considerably lower data rate than you're getting out of the GH5, lower than you're getting out of a Fujifilm camera, lower than some of the new R series cameras. So do you get a GH5 with a speed booster and take advantage of those higher data rates even though you're in a micro four thirds sensor? Or do you 100% without question, it's because of the full frame sensor and what the camera is, you go S5 right now?
For me, it'd be S5 hands down.
Okay.
I actually, even though I have, you know, the GH5, GH5S, which, by the way, if you ever see something that isn't my face on the channel, that's GH5 every single time.
Yeah.
All B-roll, everything shot with that camera. The main shot is the S1. Because on the GH5, I always shoot at the 150 megabit 4K mode, which is the lowest data rate you can go and still do 10-bit 422. Same thing on the S5, roughly. So essentially, it's the lightest data rate you can get and still have 10-bit. And at the end of that video, I was talking about like other cameras that are comparable.
Yeah.
So I mentioned the A7 III, and I show it's hideous to look at, but it shows the point. The difference between the A7 III 8-bit and the 10-bit on the S1, even, or S5, even at that low data rate, and the difference is ridiculous. The S5 just completely mops the floor with the A7 III. So, and that's due to my workflow. I don't, you know, we're creating content nonstop and shooting tests all the time and doing all this stuff. So trying to keep file sizes down. And I found that to be the sweet spot, 150 megabits, and still 4K, still 10-bit 422. I'd like 200 to 250, but 400, once you jump up to that, your computer still works pretty hard, and it's a significantly larger file size. So
Are you
that's
doing all
that's it
I
for
or
me.
IPB?
IPB.
Yeah, I found that even though all I is supposed to be less processor intensive, that modern versions of NLEs, pretty much across the boards, seem to, especially with H.265, with the HEVC, you know, footage, seem to do better with IPB. And then, in fact, they do. I've done tests also with the R5. And, you know, that 150 to 200 megabits per second is the sweet spot for people when it comes to working with this footage. Interesting.
Yeah, H.264, and like you said, those lower data rates at IPB. Again, we're going to YouTube with this. And more content is going to the web. I mean, I don't know where else people are publishing content you know, unless you're shooting a feature, but you're not
Yep.
even thinking about these cameras. So at
Can
the
you
end of the
answer
day,
a
I think
question
for
from
$2
Clay?
grand.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
No, it has to do with the S5. Will it allow for ProRes RAW into the Ninja 5? Is that one of the specs?
Yes,
Are they doing?
that's coming in an update this year, 5.9K, as well as anamorphic at Academy 35.
Yeah.
And I think there's another mode I'm missing. It's already leaving my brain, but yep, 5.9K. So yeah, I mean, for $2 grand, if you think about the A7 III, it's a huge bump, but again, autofocus, which is a big deal for a lot of people. So I
Yeah.
think Panasonic has to address it. You look at everyone else, 2 years from now, Sony and Canon are going to be able to autofocus on anything you want, however you want it done.
$1,000,000%.
Serve you a cup of tea and crumpets. And Panasonic has got
Clotted
to get
cream.
in on that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
I've got
honestly,
another
look at
question.
every Panasonic camera. Look at every Panasonic camera and just magically touch it with a wand, and it's got phase detect like Sony and Canon.
Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly.
I would feel murder in the marketplace, right?
Absolutely.
Because they have so much other crazy stuff.
They have, and one of those that I'd like to ask you about is the stabilization system on it, because I know I've just been editing some stuff off of GH5 today, and it's horrible. It's so, I know it works well in some situations, but you just get that awful.
Was it wide angle?
Yes.
Yep.
Ish, yeah, fairly wide, and just it's got that awful kind of, you're feeling quite queasy looking at the stuff.
Drunk simulator.
Yeah. So has this been improved in this camera?
I from my experience, every camera at wide angles is awful.
Right.
And for some
the Canons have it too,
lenses,
the new ones, yeah.
Yeah, and even Sony, and certain lenses on Panasonic are super terrible. So what is it, the 11 to 17?
Yes.
I'm thinking of. Is that the lens you shot on?
Yeah.
That is a deadly combination in the worst way possible.
So I don't know what it was shot on. I know it was definitely GH5, but I don't know what the lenses were.
Panasonic 17 to something, and or no, I'm sorry. I think it's the 7 to 15, 7 to 14 lens. That on the GH5 is just turn off IBIS. It's gonna do nothing but make you sick. So it's definitely not perfect, but side to side with Sony and Canon, I felt, and I have seen that the Panasonics is pretty solid. But you definitely need to know when you need to turn it off. There's a lot of scenarios where it's no good.
Yep.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, any other thoughts to wrap up the whole S5 thing? I feel like I just kind of talked way too much there.
No.
$2 grand. I mean, a lot of features.
Yeah. Exciting. There, firmware updates already announced to bring additional functionality, including some of the stuff that's in the GH, series in terms of video assist features. Right. I read that's coming a little bit later. But we're already, practically in the middle of September, so this stuff is all coming down the pike pretty quickly.
One last thought to wrap up the S5 from my perspective. One thing that excites me about this announcement isn't this camera, the S5, but if Panasonic can pack in-body stabilization, full frame, 6K RAW, all these anamorphic modes, and just a ton of other stuff. The processor in that camera can do so many different things all at the same time. You got to wonder, and it's smaller and lighter than a GH5. Yes. You got to wonder what the GH6 is going to be able to do. Same body or size.
Yeah.
I mean, that thing is going to be ridiculous.
I mean, the frame rates alone.
But do you think they're going to continue on with that? Do you think they're going to continue on with that? I think the Micro Four Thoughts, and they're going to keep it down that route?
I think they've been, hot and heavy on full frame because they're releasing this new system, and there's a lot to build there. But I don't see why not. I mean, you look at the GH5 and GH5S; those have been slam dunks. More so the GH5. just because they can put so much crazy stuff in there because it's
Sure.
because it's a
it's
small
a
sensor.
tiny sensor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's
It's
well,
like
that,
it's
I
like
mean,
taking like on
yeah,
it's like on Top Gear where they talk about those like cars that are like super light and small. You
yeah.
can put a smaller, it's a smaller engine, but it can do ridiculous stuff because it's not big and heavy and all this kind of thing. So I don't know. I don't think so. I think they're going to be, they've built such a beast of a system there. And aside from the size of the sensor, what's holding them back? If we get to 8K, 16K resolutions, yeah, it's going to be rough, but,
Yeah.
you know,
I think they absolutely will continue it, and I think one of the reasons they'll continue it is because the entire ecosystem exists all the way through the speed boosters and everything. And if they can, if they can create a camera that just gives you crazy, frame rates and functionality that you just can't get in even an APS-C camera, then why wouldn't they? Because you've got a speed booster, and now all of a sudden, you're doing, because somebody at some point is going to create a camera that costs less than $5,000 that's going to have 1,000 frames per second. Somebody's going to make a mini Phantom camera one day that's going to actually be affordable, and it won't just be in HD. So maybe they're the company to do it. Maybe that's their like the feather in their cap is that the GH series does these crazy, they've already worked out the low light stuff kind of with the GH5S. So now they can do these crazy things with the camera because of that small sensor, and people will go to that sensor when they need to do those things in a studio. Cheap ways to shoot tabletop for food commercials and things like that. We'll just get a GH6, I think it could actually.
yeah, there definitely are
for sure.
advantages to having a smaller sensor. Roz is taking off. Take care, Roz. Thank you for joining us for the first stream. Good to have you here.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the HDMI port is micro, which feels nasty coming from all the other stuff. Any other thoughts, gentlemen? We're heading into the final moments. Any questions from the chat? Anything you guys would like to talk about? Any questions?
Definitely micro. We see some questions there. Micro Four Thirds cinema zoom lenses are amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
I think they'll go down this path. I never thought it would be, but now I see them doing it for sure.
Yeah, and for sure. There's so much around Micro Four Thirds. Like we talked about already, they can do hot and heavy stuff that they just can't do on full frame. So they could just mess around with all this crazy stuff and then eventually bring it to the larger sensors. I saw somewhere. Oh, someone said still no full frame 60. So I learned something very interesting. You look at all the cameras out there. There's almost no cameras. Actually, the A7S III and the R6 are the only, and the R5, right, are the only cameras that do full frame 4K 60, right?
Yes.
Yes, correct.
So the R5 in that mode, I believe, overheats very quickly, right?
I don't think it's very quickly, but it definitely hits.
Okay.
It's not like the 8K raw or when inside of the camera, but it can.
Got it.
It can definitely overheat on both of those cameras in that mode. Yep.
So hopefully I can say this, but two things I learned from a camera design perspective, having done this S5 and from people that I spoke to from certain companies about it, when it comes to the overheating thing and the 4K 60, the reason there's a crop on most cameras in 4K 60 is, and especially Panasonic, is to be able to read out higher megapixels is really tricky. So A7S III, walk in the park, 12 megapixels, just run down, super easy. It's not going to create a ton of heat. Once you go above 20 megapixels, that's kind of the threshold, which I believe the R6 is around 20. S5, S1H, S1, those are all 24. And apparently that's where things get tricky with keeping heat under control. when it comes to that. And the second is Panasonic is incredibly conservative with their certifications. So they have the S5 certified with some crazy certification number that I can't remember, but it certifies 30 minutes or a certain amount of time for at a certain temperature that the camera has got to operate. So they got that certification. So to stay true to that, they felt it was honest to stop the recording at 30 minutes. That way you're guaranteed 30 minutes. That's what we're certified to do. That's what we're selling.
Right.
So very interesting hearing and learning about all these crazy certification like hoops you have to go through. Yeah, very interesting. So that's the deal with the 30 minutes and with the 4K 60. Apparently really tricky to do 4K 60 over 20 megapixel. So R5, I'm not sure exactly how that works, but
yeah.
Anyways,
Cool.
Any final thoughts, folks?
No,
Jordan
I
Drake,
mean,
welcome, dude.
yes.
My
What's up?
S5
Hey.
overheated at 43 minutes, but after 10 minutes in the shade, it recorded another half hour. Interesting. I never got
Yeah.
mine to overheat. I don't know what temperatures you were in. I was in about 80. I know one thing that was mentioned was the certification doesn't include direct sunlight, I believe.
Oh, really?
So if you go into direct sunlight at temperatures over 104 Fahrenheit, I think that's where the certification cuts off, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong on that.
Interesting. Well,
Oh, geez. And Shazam, I don't know if we're going to be able to get into the R5 hack by putting screws and doors and tape and stuff.
No, we're not talking about
We'll
that
say
yet. Not that yet. It's already 401. 32 Celsius in direct sunlight. Can't do American conversion. It was warm up in Canada that day, Jordan. So
I'll have to do that conversion. So.
Next week, I think we should maybe do something that is shot deck. We should start looking at some frames again. Let's have a powwow tomorrow, gentlemen, about it and try to figure something out. I'm going to go and reset for new shooter. Matt Allard had a lot of hands-on with the S5, so if you are still interested in hearing more about that camera, then you can hop over to New Shooter's channel on YouTube and check that out. I will be doing very little talking, but Eric Naso and Matt Allard will be doing a lot of talking about stuff.
And what time is that for the good folks?
That's actually in less than 30 minutes. We're at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time, and I'll do a quick reset, and we'll do more about grip and lighting in the future too, Clay. We're going to start to flesh this out. We're going to obviously every couple of weeks or so have a topic that's related to cameras in the month of September, but we're definitely going to start moving back towards our challenges and stuff like that. All right. Thank you for watching, by the way. Yeah.
Thank you all. Good to see you guys. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place, same day. Good night. Any final words? Jem, Ben,
Feel better, gentlemen. Do it. Feel better. That's all.
Yeah. Likewise to both of you. See you next week.
All the best.
Good night.
Take care.